Chicago doesn't warn you, it just takes. One moment you're standing at the edge of a crowded ballroom, holding a champagne flute you never asked for, and the next moment the most dangerous man in the Midwest is looking at you like you're the only person who exists in a room of 400 people. Selena Vale had survived a lot of things. A crime family she'd cut loose, a city that tried to swallow her whole, a life she'd rebuilt with nothing but stubbornness and a graphic design portfolio. She had not survived Kieran Voss. Not yet. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled, and follow the channel so you don't miss a single part. This one is going to hurt in the best way possible. Now, let's begin. The Blackstone Hall had been standing since 1910, and in all that time, it had absorbed enough secrets to fill every crack in its marble walls. Tonight it smelled like money. Hothouse roses, imported from somewhere that cost more than Selena's monthly rent, climbed iron trellises along the east corridor. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across 500 square feet of polished floor, and somewhere behind the string quartet, a bartender was opening a bottle of Chateau Petrus that probably cost more than her car. Selena stood near the east window with a champagne flute she'd grabbed off a passing tray purely as a prop. She hadn't taken a sip. She didn't trust anything at a party like this. Not the wine, not the smiles, and definitely not the handshakes happening in quiet corners between men in suits that fit too well. She was here for Maya. That was the only reason. Maya Chen, her cousin, first on the dance floor and last to sit down, currently glowing in a beaded ivory gown beside her new husband, Daniel Ashford. The Ashfords were old Chicago money, not the kind that came from factories or tech, but the older kind, the kind that had once traded favors with people whose names never appeared in newspapers. Maya had spent 3 years falling in love with Daniel and another year convincing Selena that the family connection was ancient history, that Daniel himself was clean, that it was safe to come. Selena had driven in from Milwaukee 2 days ago. She planned to stay for the ceremony, the reception, and not a single minute longer. She was already eyeing the exit. The room was too loud, too bright, and too packed with people who wore their ambition on the surface like cologne. She recognized 2 aldermen near the bar. A state senator was laughing too hard at something near the floral arch. These were the visible faces of a city that ran on invisible arrangements, and Selena had spent years making herself irrelevant to all of it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Stop hiding by the window and come dance." Selena was already composing an excuse when the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't an announcement. It was pressure. A subtle atmospheric shift like the moment before a storm when the air goes heavy and the birds stop moving. Conversations didn't stop all at once. They tapered. Table by table, cluster by cluster, voices dropped and heads turned toward the main entrance, and the string quartet played on for exactly 4 more bars before the lead violinist lost the thread and fell silent. Selena turned with everyone else. He came in without hurry. That was the thing she noticed first, even before she registered his face or his build or the 2 men flanking him at a distance that telegraphed bodyguards without looking like it. He moved through the entrance like time was his, and everyone else was borrowing it. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open. A detail that in this room, in this company, read not as careless but as a declaration. He didn't need to perform. He simply arrived, and the room rearranged itself around him. Kieran Voss. She knew the name because everybody in Chicago knew the name. You didn't have to be connected to know it. You could be a graphic designer in Milwaukee who'd cut every cord to this city, and still, if someone said Kieran Voss, you felt the weight of it. He was 37 years old. He controlled the largest organized network in the Midwest, which was the polite way of saying he owned the ports, the distribution chains, the private security contracts, and a not small number of the city's political relationships. He had been investigated 4 times, charged twice, convicted 0 times. I was also, she had to admit privately, and with some irritation, devastatingly composed. Not handsome in the way magazine covers were handsome. His face was harder than that, a jaw that looked like it had been hit before, and a nose that had been broken at least once. Dark eyes set under heavy brows. A mouth that seemed like it defaulted to flat rather than warm. He was the kind of man who occupied space with a density that made other men stand differently around him. Shoulders pulled back, chins lifted, the unconscious animal math of proximity to a predator. Selena turned back to her window. She was not interested. She was leaving in the morning. She was going to go home, work on the brand identity project that was due Thursday, eat leftover Thai food, and forget she'd ever come back to Chicago at all. She made it approximately 45 seconds before she felt it. Not heard, felt. The specific prickling at the back of your neck that your body sends when someone is looking at you with too much focus. She'd had it before, on bad streets late at night, in parking garages, once in a parking lot in Wicker Park, when she'd been followed for 2 blocks before turning around to confront the guy directly. This was different. There was no threat in it, or at least not the kind her body usually coded as threat. It was the sensation of being studied rather than stalked, observed with the patience of someone who was not in a hurry and was not going to pretend otherwise. She turned because not turning would have been a kind of cowardice she didn't have in her. He was looking at her, not scanning the room and pausing on her, not the casual drift of a man cataloging guests. He was looking at her with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had already made a decision and was simply confirming it. Across 40 feet of marble floor and 400 people in formal wear, his eyes were on her face, and when she turned and met them, he did not look away. She looked away first. Her heart was moving faster than she wanted it to. She set the champagne flute down on the window ledge, pressed her back teeth together, and breathed through her nose. This meant nothing. Rich, powerful men looked at women at parties. That was the whole economy of rooms like this. It didn't mean anything. Her phone buzzed again. Maya from across the room. Did Kieran Voss just look at you? And then, a second later, Selena. Selena. She typed back, I'm leaving at 9:30. Maya's response came in under 3 seconds. You absolutely are not. She made it to 10:15 before the evening caught up with her. Maya had pulled her onto the dance floor twice, introduced her to Daniel's mother, a small, sharp woman who shook hands like a politician, and talked her into a second glass of champagne that Selena had again largely used as a prop. The room had warmed up and gotten louder. The senator was dancing badly near the DJ booth. The aldermen had moved to a corner table where they were deep in something that looked like it had stopped being a social conversation an hour ago. She hadn't looked for Kieran Voss again. She'd been deliberate about that. She was near the bar, waiting for a glass of water, when someone appeared at her left. Not suddenly, deliberately. The same unhurried arrival she'd watched from across the room. You've been avoiding the champagne all night, he said. Not an opener, not a line, just a statement of something he had apparently noticed, offered without any particular inflection. She turned. He was closer than she'd registered when she'd looked at him across the room, taller, broader, across the shoulder, and his eyes were darker than she'd thought, not quite black, some shade of deep brown that the chandeliers pulled reddish highlights from. He was looking at her with the same directness as before, and up close it was more unsettling because there was nothing predatory in it, nothing sleek. He looked like a man who was genuinely curious and had decided that hiding it would be a waste of time. I don't drink at parties, she said. Any particular reason? I don't know what's in the glass. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement of a point. That's a reasonable position. I know. He didn't flinch at the flatness in her voice. Most men would have recalibrated, gone warmer, gone funnier, tried a different angle. He just stood there, at ease, and let the moment breathe. I'm Kieran, he said. I know who you are. And you're Selena Vale, he paused. Maya's cousin. You live in Milwaukee now. You left Chicago 8 years ago. The back of her neck went cold. How do you know that? Maya talks about you. He said it plainly, like it was the most obvious thing. She's mentioned you in passing at 2 different events over the last year. I pay attention. She studied his face. He was telling the truth. She could see it, the absence of performance in the way he said it. That almost made it worse. You remember specific people your hosts mention in passing, she said. I remember things that interest me. The bartender appeared with her glass of water. She took it without breaking eye contact with Kieran because looking away felt like giving something up. And I interest you. Yes. No hedge, no softening, just yes, like it was a fact he'd already processed and categorized and wasn't going to apologize for. She should have ended the conversation there. Should have taken her water and walked back to Maya's table and finished the evening and driven north tomorrow morning. She knew what he was. She knew what world he operated in. She had spent 8 years specifically not being in proximity to that world. Instead, she said, Why? He considered it, and she noticed that he did that. He actually considered it, rather than reaching for the first available answer. You've been standing in this room for 3 hours, and you look like you're waiting for permission to leave. Eve. I don't need permission to leave. No, he agreed. But you're still here. She said nothing. What kept you? My cousin's wedding, she said. Obviously. You stayed past when the obligation required you to stay. He tilted his head slightly. Which means something about the room interested you despite yourself. Or I got cornered into dancing twice. The corner of his mouth moved, the faintest suggestion of something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood. Did Maya drag you, or did you allow it? Selena opened her mouth to answer and stopped. Because the honest answer was complicated, and she didn't feel like being honest with him. I should go find her, she said. You should, he agreed, and he stepped back. Not dramatically, just a clean half step, and gave her the space to leave. He didn't push, didn't press, just stepped back and watched her go with those dark eyes that paid attention to everything. She walked back to Maya's table without looking over her shoulder. She almost made it. She was in the coat check line at 10:45, 3 people back, when Maya appeared at her elbow with her shoes in one hand and a look on her face that Selena had been dreading since the text messages. He talked to you, Maya said. Yes. What did he say? Nothing important. He knows your name. Apparently you've mentioned me at events. He paid attention. It's nothing. Maya was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Maya. He doesn't do that. Do what? Talk to people. At parties. Like specifically, Kieran Voss does not make conversation at parties. He attends them when he has to. He doesn't talk to strangers. He definitely doesn't. She paused. How long did you talk to him? 5 minutes, maybe. Selena. It wasn't a thing, Maya. He watched you for 2 hours before he talked to you. Daniel noticed. His whole security team noticed. That's not nothing. Selena reached the front of the coat check line and handed over her ticket. She thought about telling Maya that it didn't matter, that she was leaving in the morning and Kieran Voss could watch all the people he wanted without it having any relevance to her life. She thought about saying that some things look significant and turn out to be nothing. She got her coat, shrugged it on, and turned back to Maya. I'll call you when I get to the hotel, she said. Maya grabbed her wrist. Not hard. Just enough. Be careful. Selena looked at her cousin. I'm always careful. You came back to Chicago. For the first time in 8 years, you came back. Maya's voice was lower now. Don't let this city get its hooks back in you. I mean it. Selena kissed her on the cheek, squeezed her hand, and walked out into the November cold. The hotel was 4 blocks from the Blackstone. She'd walked it twice in daylight, and the route was simple. Down Balbo, left on Michigan, the Hilton on the east side of the boulevard. Chicago in November was brutal in the way only lake cities could be. The wind coming off the water with a force that felt personal, like it had specifically decided to get through your coat. She was halfway down Balbo when she became aware of the black SUV. It was parked across the street, engine off, and it had been there when she'd arrived at the Blackstone 3 hours ago because she'd walked this block, and she noticed parked vehicles the way her father had taught her to, years ago, in a life she'd left. 2 men in the front. She couldn't see their faces in the dark. The plates were clean. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look directly at the vehicle. She kept her pace even, her breathing deliberate, and ran the math on what it meant. The most likely answer was that it was nothing. There had been 400 people at that reception, at least a third of them with security details. People like the alderman, the senator, the various businessmen whose fortunes required some degree of insulation from the city they operated in. A parked SUV near the Blackstone at 11 p.m. meant nothing on its own. The second most likely answer was something she didn't want to think about yet. She got to the hotel without incident. The lobby was warm and empty except for a night desk clerk and a man in a business suit reading something on his phone in one of the armchairs. She took the elevator to the 7th floor, let herself into the room, threw the deadbolt, and sat on the edge of the bed with her coat still on. She sat there for a while in the dark. She wasn't scared exactly. She was something more precise than scared. She was calibrating. Running the information she had through the framework she'd built for herself over 8 years of constructing a normal, careful, quiet life. The SUV might mean nothing. Kieran Voss's attention at a wedding might mean nothing. Maya's warning might be the reflexive anxiety of someone who loved her and had married into a world with edges. She got up, took off her coat, and went to the window. Michigan Avenue at midnight was still moving. Cabs, a delivery truck, two people walking fast against the wind. Below the window, streetlights turned the sidewalk amber. She could see the Blackstone's entrance from here, the last guests still trickling out, and the black SUV, which had followed her from Balbo and was now parked on Michigan, 60 feet from the hotel entrance. Her stomach dropped. Not fear, not panic, something colder. She picked up her phone and called Maya. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up, sat back down on the bed, and thought about what she knew. Kieran Voss had looked at her across a room like he was choosing her. He had talked to her like a man who had already decided something. She had been followed to her hotel by a vehicle she couldn't identify. She lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and told herself very firmly that in the morning she was getting in her car and driving north. And this was going to become the story she told exactly once, privately, to herself, and then never again. She believed it. For approximately 6 hours. She was in the hotel breakfast room at 7:40 a.m., working through a cup of coffee and ignoring the business news playing silently on the wall screen, when someone sat down across from her. Not Kieran. A woman, early 40s, sharp face, dark hair pulled back, a fitted jacket that looked expensive and was probably a cover for the fact that she was carrying. She sat down across from Selena with the ease of someone who had been told to do exactly this and had no particular feelings about it. She put a card on his table. Plain white. Kieran Voss and a phone number, and nothing else. "He'd like to see you," the woman said. Selena looked at the card, looked at the woman. "No." "He thought you might say that." The woman reached into her jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, placed it on top of the card. "He asked me to give you this if you said no." Selena unfolded the paper. It was a printed photograph. Security camera image, black and white, time-stamped 11:04 p.m. The Blackstone Hall rear exit. 2 men she didn't recognize, but in the edge of the frame, barely visible but unmistakably there. A man she did recognize. Older now, heavier, but the jawline and the specific way he held his right shoulder were 30 years of muscle memory in her brain. Her uncle, Marco Val, who was supposed to be in federal prison for another 3 years, who was, according to this photograph, at her cousin's wedding last night. The room felt smaller. The coffee in her cup had gone cold without her noticing. She folded the photograph back along its original crease and set it on the table and breathed. "What time?" she said. 11 a.m., the woman said. "He'll send a car." Selena picked up the card, turned it over. Nothing on the back, just the number. "Tell him I'll take my own car," she said. The woman almost smiled. "He assumed you would." She drove north on Lake Shore Drive with the lake to her right, gray-green under the overcast sky, whitecaps breaking where the wind hit the water. She'd changed into jeans and a dark wool sweater and flat boots. Practical, not performative. She was not going to dress for Kieran Voss. She was going to have one conversation, get the information she needed about her uncle, and leave. The address took her to a building she'd never been in, a slim glass tower in the Gold Coast that looked like it had been designed to be inconspicuous in a way that was itself a kind of statement. The doorman knew her name before she said it. The elevator required a code that he gave her on a small slip of paper. Not the penthouse, the 32nd floor. The elevator opened directly into a space that didn't look like an office or an apartment, but something between the two. Wide windows looking out at the lake, low furniture in dark leather and steel, a wall of books that looked read rather than displayed. No art, no flowers, nothing decorative that she could identify. The space had the feeling of a place where work got done, where people came and said difficult things and left without pretending the difficulty wasn't there. Kieran was standing at the window with his back to her. He turned when he heard the elevator. In daylight, without the ballroom chandelier light, he looked different, slightly harder, more present. The shadows under his eyes visible in a way they hadn't been the night before. He was in a gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, and she noticed that his forearms had the look of a man who'd worked with his hands before the suit had become standard. There was a scar at his left wrist, an old one, faded to silver. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't come for you," she said. "I came for the photograph." He nodded, like this was expected. "Sit down." "I'll stand." He sat down himself, unhurried, in the armchair closest to the window, which put the light behind him and her facing it. She caught the strategy of it, but couldn't tell if it was deliberate or just habit. Either way, she moved sideways to a different position, putting the window to her left, and he watched her do it without comment. Marco Vale, she said, tell me what you know. He was released 8 weeks ago, Kieran said. Compassionate release. Medical grounds. His attorney filed the motion 6 months ago, and the district judge signed it in September. 8 weeks. He'd been out for 8 weeks and no one had told her. He's supposed to have 3 years left. He does. On paper, the compassionate release is conditional. Medical treatment, house arrest, supervised contact. He paused. None of those conditions are being observed, and he was at Maya's wedding. In the rear entrance, briefly. His men have been watching Daniel Ashford's operations for the last 2 months. We believe he's positioning to re-establish some of the old supply lines your family controlled before his arrest. Ashford's company has distribution infrastructure that would be useful for that. Her jaw was tight. Daniel's clean. Daniel's company isn't careful, Kieran said. There's a difference. She stood there and looked at him. He was giving her information freely, laying it out without theater, and that itself was a form of power. The power of being the one with the information, of being the one who decided when to share it. She needed to stay oriented to that. She needed to remember she was sitting in his space, at his invitation, with information he'd chosen to reveal. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you should know. That's not a full answer. He looked at her steadily. Because Marco Vale becoming active again is a problem that affects multiple people, and one of those people is you, specifically. And I'd rather you knew what you were walking into than not. I'm not walking into anything. I'm leaving today. You were leaving today, he said, before you saw the photograph. She wanted to argue with that. She didn't argue with it. What do you want from me? She said. Nothing, he said. Right now. The silence stretched. Outside, the lake moved under its gray sky, indifferent to all of it. Right now, she repeated. I wanted to meet you, he said. I've done that. What you do with the information I've given you is your own decision. And if I go to the FBI? You can. He didn't move, didn't tense. They already know about the release. They're watching him. They're slow. And you're not. No. She picked up her bag from the floor where she'd set it beside her. She stood at the full height of the decision she'd made to get in her car and drive north today and leave this city behind for another 8 years. And she looked at the man across from her who had watched her across a ballroom last night and then sent someone to her hotel breakfast table with a photograph that had stopped her cold. I don't know what you're building toward, she said, but whatever it is, I'm not part of it. Okay, he said. She took a step toward the elevator. Selena? She stopped. She didn't turn. Be careful on the drive back, he said. Marco's men followed your car from the hotel this morning. They stopped at the end of the drive, but they have your plates. The elevator was behind her, 3 steps away. Her keys were in her hand. How do you know that? She said. Because I had people watching for it, he said. Since last night. She turned then. She couldn't help it. He was still in the armchair by the window, still unhurried, the gray lake behind him, and on his face was the expression she'd noticed at the bar. Not satisfaction, not victory, just the acknowledgement of a fact. He had been watching out for her, without asking permission, without announcing it. He had simply decided that was what would happen, and it had happened, and now she knew. She should have been angry. The rational response was anger. The response she had instead was something she didn't have a clean name for, something in the territory between alarmed and complicated, something that lived in the part of her brain that noticed, against all common sense, that a man who had watched her across a room for 2 hours and then sent someone with a photograph that proved he'd been paying attention to her safety was not a man who was indifferent. She got in the elevator. The doors closed. She stood in the mirrored box and breathed, and in the reflection she looked exactly like a woman who had just walked out of a conversation she was going to be thinking about for a very long time. She drove back to Milwaukee in 4 hours flat, eyes on the rearview mirror for the first 40 miles. 3 days later, she looked out her apartment window and saw a black SUV parked across the street. It was there the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th day, she stood at her window with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and understood that Kieran Voss had no intention of letting her disappear. And the part that scared her most, the part she pressed down flat and refused to examine, was that somewhere underneath the anger and the rational alarm, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted him to. The SUV was a black Chevy Suburban, late model, tinted windows dark enough that she couldn't see the plates clearly from the 7th floor. It parked in the same spot each morning, across from the Walgreens on the corner, angled so that whoever was in the front seat had a clean line of sight to the entrance of her building. She'd clocked it 3 days running before she'd let herself admit it wasn't coincidence. Milwaukee was supposed to be her clean slate. That had been the whole point. Not Chicago, not her family's city, not the city where the Vale name still meant something in certain rooms. Milwaukee was anonymous. Milwaukee was a studio apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant, freelance contracts with mid-sized companies who needed branding work, Tuesday evenings at a life drawing class because a therapist had once told her that making things with her hands helped her stay in her body. Milwaukee was 4 years of being nobody, in particular, and she had worked for every day of it. The Suburban was making her feel like she'd never left. On the fourth morning, she put on her coat, walked downstairs, crossed the street, and knocked on the driver's side window. The window came down. The man behind the wheel was mid-30s, thick-necked, with the specific kind of patient blankness that came from professional training. He looked at her without surprise. "Who sent you?" she said. "Ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. Who sent you?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached into the center console and produced a phone, already open to a contact. He held it out to her through the window. The contact was saved as KV. She took the phone, pressed call. It rang once. "I wondered how long before you came down," Kieran said. She turned away from the driver, walked 3 steps toward the sidewalk. The wind off the lake was doing its usual thing, finding every gap in her coat. "You've been watching my building for 4 days." "Yes." "You don't have my permission to do that." "No," he agreed. "I don't." "Then stop." I was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man constructing a response, more like the silence of someone deciding how much of the truth to give. "Your uncle's people picked up your plates when you left Chicago. We tracked 2 of them as far as Kenosha before they turned back. They know your address, Selena. They got it before I could intercept the follow." The wind pulled at the loose end of her scarf. She stood on the sidewalk outside her building and understood, clearly, and without wanting to, that the distance she'd put between herself and Chicago had just been rendered meaningless. "You should have told me that immediately," she said. "You weren't answering my calls." "I didn't have your number." "You had the card." She had the card. She had put it in the pocket of the coat she'd been wearing that morning and hadn't touched it since. "I wasn't going to call you." "I know," he said. "That's why I sent someone." She looked back at the Suburban. The driver had his eyes forward again, patient, going nowhere. "You can't just post a man outside my building, Kieran." "He's not just outside your building. There's another one in the lot behind your building and one on the corner at Jackson. I can pull them all today if you want. But then you're alone with your uncle's people knowing your address, and I'm not willing to pretend that's fine." She breathed. The air was cold enough that she could see it. "You don't get to decide what's fine for me." "No," he said. "I don't. So decide. Tell me you want them gone, and they're gone. I won't pretend that's my preference, but it's your call." She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. A woman with a stroller walked past her, not looking up. Traffic moved normally. The city had no idea anything was happening. It never did. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "To do what?" "To figure out whether I trust you enough to not tell you to go to hell." Another pause. "Fair," he said. She handed the phone back through the window without looking at the driver, crossed the street, walked upstairs, sat down at her desk, and did not do any work for 3 hours. She called Maya that afternoon. Maya answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call. "You saw the car." "Cars, plural. How long have you known about Marco?" Maya's exhale was long and unhappy. "Daniel told me 2 weeks ago, after the wedding. He got a call from one of his logistics managers. Someone had been asking questions about their warehouse schedule. Daniel ran it back and figured out it came from one of Marco's old contacts. And you didn't tell me." "I was trying to figure out how to tell you without..." A pause. "Without pulling you back in." "Maya." I know. Okay. I was wrong. I just didn't want this to be your problem." Selena pressed 2 fingers between her eyes. "It was always going to be my problem. The moment Marco got out, I was always going to be in his orbit whether I wanted to be or not. You know that." "I know that." "What does he want?" "We don't know exactly. Daniel thinks he wants access to the port contracts, the ones his attorneys froze when he went in. Some of those are technically still in Marco's name through a shell company. Daniel's lawyers are trying to unwind it, but it's complicated. Is Daniel in danger? Daniel has... Maya stopped. Daniel has his own people looking into it. Selena caught the careful phrasing. His own people. As in Daniel's family has some old relationships that are useful right now. He's not clean, Selena. I told you that, but he's not Marco. She sat with that. Outside her window, the Suburban was still there, steady, visible. She had the specific feeling of watching a wall close. Not fast, not dramatically, just the slow and inescapable geometry of a room getting smaller. Kieran Voss is watching my building, she said. The silence from Maya was different from her previous pauses. This one had texture. Okay. He says Marco's people know my address. Okay, that's bad. That's genuinely bad. I know it's bad, Maya. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Selena. Maya's voice dropped. Kieran Voss doesn't do things for free. Whatever he's offering you, whatever protection he's providing, he has a reason for it. He's not... She struggled for the word. He's not a safe person. I know what he is. Do you? Because you looked at him at the wedding the way you looked at that painting in the Art Institute when we were 16. Like it scared you, but you couldn't stop looking. Selena said nothing. I'm just saying be careful, Maya said. Be really, really careful. She hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment, listening to the restaurant below her starting its evening prep. The sound of something hitting a wok. The low talk in Vietnamese she'd never learned and had found comforting anyway. She picked up her phone, typed a message to the number on the card. I want to talk. In person. Neutral ground. The response came back in under a minute. Name the place. She thought about it. There's a diner on Prospect called Lena's. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Another minute. I'll be there. She set the phone down, went to her closet, pulled out a box she hadn't opened in 4 years, and spent the rest of the evening sitting cross-legged on the floor with the contents spread around her. Old photographs, mostly. A folded letter she didn't reread, a USB drive with files she'd taken when she left. Evidence, she'd thought at 23, assembled with the obsessive care of a young woman who understood that people like her uncle didn't let you walk away without something to use against them. She'd never used any of it. She looked at the USB drive for a long time before she put everything back in the box and slid it under the bed. Lena's diner was cash only, served coffee from a machine that had probably been manufactured before either of them was born, and occupied the corner of Prospect and Bradford with the stubborn permanence of a place that had outlasted everything around it. Selena got there 8 minutes early, took a booth in the back where she could see both entrances, and ordered coffee she wasn't going to drink. Kieran came through the door at 3 minutes past 9 with one man behind him, the same compact presence she'd noticed at the wedding. Someone who scanned the room once, and then settled into a position near the front that managed to look casual and wasn't. Kieran sat down across from her without ceremony. He looked like he'd slept less than she had. The shadows under his eyes were darker than they'd been in Chicago, and something in the set of his jaw was tighter. He hadn't shaved. He looked, she thought, like a man who had several things happening at once and wasn't allowing any of them to show. The waitress appeared. He ordered black coffee. Selena waited. Start talking, she said when the waitress left. He wrapped both hands around the mug the woman had brought and looked at Selena across the table. Marco Vale isn't just repositioning his business, he said. He's retaliating. 2 of my warehouses in the south side were hit 3 nights ago. Minor damage, mostly a message. His people have also made contact with 2 members of my network trying to flip them. And why is that my problem? Because the message Marco is sending isn't about territory, Kieran said. It's about me. He knows I've had contact with you. He knows you came to my building in Chicago. He's making the calculation that you're leverage. The coffee in her mug was black and bitter, and she wrapped her hands around it because she needed something to hold. How does he know I came to your building? Someone at the Blackstone talked. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that Marco has positioned you as a vulnerability of mine, which makes you a target, even though you're not actually... He stopped. Even though I'm not actually what? She said. He looked at her directly. Even though there's nothing between us that justifies that calculation. But he doesn't know that. No, she breathed through her nose. So your attention at a party, which was, I will remind you, completely uninvited and entirely your choice, has made me a target for a man who should still be in federal prison. His jaw tightened. It was the first visible crack in the controlled surface. Yes. And your solution is to surround my building with your people. It's a temporary solution. What's the permanent one? He held her gaze. I'm working on that. That's not an answer. It's the honest one. He set the mug down. I can neutralize Marco's ability to reach you within 3 weeks. I can make the math not work for him. Make the cost of using you as leverage higher than any possible benefit. That requires moving a few pieces on my end. But in the meantime, I need you to not be alone, and I need to know where you are. She laughed. Not warm. The kind of laugh that came out when something was too much. You need to know where I am. Yes, Kieran. She leaned forward slightly. I left my family's world at 23. I spent 8 years making sure nobody in that world knew where I was or what I was doing. And now you're sitting across from me in a diner in Milwaukee, telling me you need to track my location. I'm not tracking your location. I'm asking you to tell me where you are. What is the difference? The difference is consent, he said. I'm asking. She stared at him. He stared back. And that was the thing about him. He didn't blink it away, didn't soften it with charm, just held the position and let her look at it clearly. What do you get out of this? She said. Be honest. Don't give me the security line. What do you actually get? The question sat on the table between them. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him decide. I got interested in you, he said. That's the beginning of it. You came into a room full of people performing for each other, and you stood against a wall and looked like you wanted to set the whole thing on fire and walk out. And I made the mistake of looking at you too long, and now your uncle thinks he can use that against me. He picked up the mug. The security concern is real. It's not the whole picture. Her chest was doing something she didn't trust. So you're telling me that your attention, your completely voluntary, unrequested attention, has created a threat to my safety, and now you want me to respond to that threat by staying close to you. I know how that sounds. Do you? Yes, and I'd understand if you told me to. He stopped. Something moved across his face. I'd understand if you told me you wanted nothing to do with this. She looked at him. At the hard line of his jaw and the dark eyes and the scar at his wrist, and the way he was sitting across from her with the specific stillness of a man who was used to rooms going quiet when he walked in and was not using any of that right now. He was just sitting in a booth at a diner on Prospect Avenue holding a bad cup of coffee and telling her something that was closer to the truth than she'd expected. I have a life here, she said. Clients. A routine. I have a life that has nothing to do with any of this. I know. I don't want to be protected. I don't want to detail, and I don't want to be moved somewhere, and I don't want to be a person who needs those things. Okay? But, she said, and hated herself slightly for the word, I'm not stupid, and I know what my uncle is. I know what he's capable of, and I know that if he's decided I'm useful to him, he will not stop until he's gotten what he needs, or someone makes him stop. Kieran said nothing. He was listening. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, if Marco is not neutralized, your word, I walk, and you don't follow me, and you don't send anyone to sit in the parking lot behind my building. Agreed. And in the meantime, she said, if you're going to have people watching my building, they report to me too. I want to know what they're seeing, not a summary, direct. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration, the recognition of something that hadn't been in his original assessment. Agreed, he said. She sat back. Good. The diner hummed around them. The waitress refilled Kieran's coffee without being asked. Outside the window, Prospect Avenue was doing its ordinary morning, oblivious. One more thing, she said. He looked at her. The next time you decide I need to know something about my own family, you tell me immediately. You don't wait for the right moment. You don't hold it to use as leverage. You call. His expression did something complicated. Okay. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. That's why I said okay. The first week passed with the tight, unnatural calm of a held breath. Kieran's man, she learned his name was Reyes, checked in each morning via text with a one-word status. She kept her schedule. Client calls on Monday and Wednesday. The life drawing class on Tuesday evening. A coffee with her friend Petra on Thursday that she almost canceled and then didn't because canceling things was how you let the fear start making your decisions. Kieran called twice that week. Both times brief, information only. Marco's people had pulled back from Milwaukee. There had been a fire at a storage facility in Gary, Indiana, possibly connected, still being verified. He spoke to her like she was someone who could handle the information, which she was, and appreciated. She noticed she was looking at her phone more than usual. She noticed that and was annoyed by it, and then annoyed at herself for being annoyed, which was the particular recursive hell of being honest with yourself about something you'd rather not be honest about. On Friday morning, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. Selena, a man's voice. Older, with a specific rasp she hadn't heard in 8 years but recognized immediately, the way you recognize the smell of a house you grew up in. It's your uncle. She was standing at her kitchen counter in socked feet with a coffee she'd just poured. Her whole body registered the voice before her mind caught up, her spine going rigid, her grip on the mug tightening by reflex. How did you get this number? She said. I'm your family, sweetheart. I've always known how to find you. A pause. He was letting her feel the shape of that. I heard you were at Maya's wedding. I would have said hello, but it seemed like you had company. What do you want, Marco? I want to see my niece. I want to have a meal. Is that so strange? You want something, say what it is. Always so direct. He sounded almost fond. You got that from your mother. She was the same way. Cut right to it. Another pause, and this one had an edge under the warmth. You've been spending time with Kieran Voss. She said nothing. That concerns me, Selena, not because I have anything against the man personally, but you left this life. That was your choice, and I respected it. Voss's world is a step up in intensity from anything your father was involved in. I would hate to see you. Don't, she said. Don't do the protective uncle thing. We both know what that is. His voice cooled slightly. I'm trying to have a civil conversation. Then be civil and tell me what you want. There's a storage unit in Bridgeport, he said. The lease is technically in your name, from a company your father set up before he died. I need access to what's inside it. The kitchen was very quiet. I don't know anything about a storage unit. But it's in your name, so legally, no. Selena. Whatever's in that storage unit, I don't want it in my name and I don't want to be connected to it, and I'm not helping you access it. Hire a lawyer. I've tried the legal route. His voice was flat now, the warmth stripped out completely, and this was the real version of him. She remembered this version from childhood, the particular quality of his silence when someone wasn't cooperating. The unit is sealed pending a federal review. The only person who can petition to have that review lifted is the leaseholder, which is you. Then it stays sealed. Selena. Just her name, but the weight behind it was different now. Not affection. A different kind of pressure. I'm asking you nicely right now. This conversation is still in the nice category. I would like it to stay there. Her hand was steady. Her voice was steady. I'm hanging up now, Marco. Don't call this number again. She hung up, set the phone face down on the counter, and stood there breathing for a long moment. Then she picked it back up and called Kieran. He answered immediately. What happened? Marco called me directly. She moved to the window, checking the street without thinking. He wants me to file a petition to lift a federal review on a storage unit in Bridgeport that's apparently in my name through my father's estate. He said it was a polite request. He made it clear it won't be polite for long. A beat of silence. Don't go anywhere. I'm sending... I don't need you to send anyone, she said. I need you to tell me what's in that storage unit. Silence. Kieran. I'm not certain, he said, but based on what I know about your father's arrangements with the Bridgeport crew before his arrest, it's probably documentation. Old ledgers, maybe photographs. The kind of records that would be damaging to a lot of people if they surfaced. Including you? The pause was exactly one beat too long. Including some of my predecessors' people. Yes. She pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass. So Marco's not the only one who wants access to it. He didn't answer. And you knew about this storage unit, she said. Before. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I didn't know it was in your name, he said. I knew the unit existed. I didn't know the legal structure until 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The diner meeting had been 5 days ago, which meant he'd found out about it 2 days after she'd explicitly told him to communicate directly and immediately. The cold from the window glass was moving up her arm. You had it for 3 days. I was verifying the details before I told you, she said. I told you in the diner. Immediately. I said immediately. I know. Then what are you doing? I was protecting you from... Stop. Her voice came out flat and hard. Stop finishing that sentence. You don't get to decide what information about my own life I need protection from. We had an agreement that lasted less than a week. Selena, I'm going to Bridgeport, she said. Today. I'm going to look at whatever is in that unit and then I'm going to decide what to do about it. Alone. You cannot go there alone. Marco's people, are you going to stop me? The silence between them was different now. She could feel the shape of his frustration through the phone. Not anger exactly, more the specific tension of a man who was used to being the person who decided how things went and was standing against a wall. No, he said quietly. I'm not going to stop you. Good. She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. Then you can either tell me what you know about that unit or you can find out from somewhere else. Your choice. She was already pulling her coat on when he said, I'll meet you there. She stopped. 2 hours, he said. Give me 2 hours to get to Bridgeport and get the right people in place, and then we go in together. You see everything I see, no filters. She stood in her doorway with her coat half on and her keys in her hand. The street below was quiet. Reyes's car was in its usual spot. 2 hours, she said. 2 hours. She hung up, finished putting her coat on, and walked downstairs into the cold gray morning that had suddenly become something entirely different from the careful, ordinary life she had been trying so hard to. She drove south on I-94 with both hands on the wheel and the heater running and the radio off. Because she didn't want noise, she wanted to be able to hear herself think. The gray sky had dropped lower since morning, and the highway was moving in that particular Midwestern winter way. Functional, deliberate, everyone doing their speed and minding the distance between cars. She had 2 hours to get to Bridgeport, and she didn't know what she was going to find there, and she was holding both of those facts in her chest like stones. The storage facility was on a block in Bridgeport that backed up against the river, one of those industrial pockets that the city kept meaning to redevelop and kept not redeveloping, where self-storage units shared the street with a welding shop and a trucking company whose lot was always half full of rigs going nowhere visible. She'd looked it up on her phone before she got on the highway. Vale Family Holdings, LLC. The name her father had used for the shell company was so generic it was almost insulting. She had a memory, sudden and unwanted, of sitting in her father's kitchen at 15 watching him sign documents at the table, asking what they were for, being told it was just paperwork, just business, just business. She was 20 minutes out when Kieran called. I'm at the facility, he said. You said 2 hours. I said I needed 2 hours to get people in place. I didn't say I needed 2 hours to get there myself. A pause. There are 3 vehicles parked on the street that I don't recognize, one at each end of the block and one in the facility's own lot. Her knuckles tightened on the wheel. Marco. Most likely. He made the call this morning, you told him no, and he's now trying to move before you can. Another pause, and she heard something in the background. Voices. Movement. I have 5 people here. We can handle the access. I'm 20 minutes out. Don't go in without me. The silence he gave her was exactly the kind that meant he'd already considered going in without her and was deciding whether to admit it. 20 minutes, he said. She pressed the accelerator. Shh. The block looked ordinary from a distance, which was the thing about Marco's method. It had always looked ordinary from a distance. She pulled onto the street from the south end and immediately clocked the vehicles Kieran had mentioned. A dark green Tahoe parked too close to the hydrant at the corner. A gray sedan in the facility lot, facing out, engine probably running. She didn't look at them directly as she parked. She got out and walked toward the facility entrance the way she would if she were just a person coming to access a unit, which she was, technically. Kieran was inside the entrance booth with the facility manager, a heavy-set man in his 50s with the specific expression of someone being paid to be cooperative and not entirely comfortable with the rate. Reyes and 2 other men she didn't know were positioned at intervals she understood immediately as tactical, without being able to articulate exactly why. Kieran looked at her when she came through the door. His expression did a quick inventory, checking her over the way he'd been doing since Milwaukee, the habitual scan of someone calculating threat levels, and then settled. Any trouble on the drive? No. She looked at the manager. I need access to Unit 14C. It's in the name of Vale Family Holdings. The manager looked at her, looked at Kieran, looked back at her. I need ID. She produced her driver's license. He spent a long time looking at it, and then typed something into his system and then said, I'll need to verify with the Federal Lien Office. There's a hold on that unit. I know about the hold, she said. I'm the leaseholder. I have the right to inventory access under the terms of the hold. Here. She put her phone on the counter, showing him the section of federal storage law she'd pulled up on the drive. Her father had made her memorize the relevant codes when she was 17. She'd thought at the time it was overkill. She had not been right about that. The manager read it, looked unhappy, typed something else. 15 minutes, he said. I have to make a call. Make it fast, Kieran said quietly. Not loud. Just the specific register of a man who didn't need to be loud to be clear. The manager made the call in under 10 minutes. He came back with a set of keys and a clipboard and the expression of a man who had decided that whatever happened in Unit 14C was not his problem. The unit was in the back row of the facility, ground level, accessible through a corridor that smelled like concrete dust and old metal. The overhead fluorescents buzzed and flickered at the far end of the corridor, and the sound of traffic outside was distant and muffled. Selena walked in front with the keys. Kieran walked beside her, one step back. Reyes came behind. At the door of 14C, she stopped. The padlock had been cut. Not recently. The exposed metal at the cut point had started to oxidize slightly, which meant it had been open for at least a few days. The door itself was closed, pulled to, but not locked. She looked at Kieran. He looked at the door and then at Reyes, who moved forward, positioned himself to the side of the frame, and pulled the door open in a single motion while staying out of the threshold. Empty space. No threat. The smell that came out was old cardboard and something else underneath it, something chemical that she associated with darkroom photography, developer fluid or fixative or whatever her father's people had used back when they'd printed things rather than storing them digitally. She went in. The unit was approximately 10 by 20, metal shelving along both walls, and she took it in with a fast sweep and understood immediately that someone had been here before her. Not just been here, had worked the space methodically. The shelving on the left wall was empty, the cardboard boxes that had presumably sat there visible only as rectangular dust shadows on the metal. The shelving on the right still had boxes, but they were open, lids off, several files pulled and scattered or missing entirely. The floor had loose papers across it in a pattern that said someone had gone through boxes fast rather than carefully. Kieran crouched near the left wall, looking at the dust impressions. This was done in the last 48 hours, he said. The dust disturbance is fresh. Marco, she said, or someone working for him. He stood. He didn't wait for you to say no. He went in before he made the call. She moved to the right wall to the boxes that were still there and started pulling files. Some of them were exactly what she'd expected. Old financial records, the kind of layered paper trail her father's generation had used to move money through legitimate-looking entities. She went through them quickly, not reading, just sorting, checking dates. Most of it was from 15 to 20 years ago. There were photographs in one box. Men she didn't know, mostly, meeting in restaurants and parking lots. The kind of surveillance photos that could have been taken by her father's people or by law enforcement. She couldn't immediately tell. She kept moving. Then she found the box at the back of the lowest shelf. It was smaller than the others, sealed with a different kind of tape, the industrial red stripe kind. And her name was written on the top in her father's handwriting. Not the company name. Her name. Selena. She sat down on the concrete floor without deciding to. Knelt, really, but it felt like sitting down, the weight of it. She was aware of Kieran behind her, aware that he'd stopped moving, that the unit was very quiet. She pulled the tape, opened the box. Inside was a single manila envelope, sealed, her name on it again in the same handwriting, and underneath the envelope a zip drive in a plastic case, and underneath the zip drive a folded document with a federal court seal on the front. She picked up the document first. She read it 3 times before she understood what it was. It was a cooperation agreement, dated 11 years ago. The signature at the bottom was her father's. The co-signatories were 2 federal prosecutors whose names she didn't recognize and one name she did. The lead investigator on the task force that had put Marco Vale in prison. Her father had cooperated. Her father had given the government everything they needed to convict Marco, and he had done it 11 years ago, 3 years before she had left, which meant he had been living in the same house as Marco, attending the same dinners, sitting at the same tables, and he had been the one feeding the case against him the entire time. Her hands were steady. She registered this with distant surprise, that her hands were perfectly steady while the architecture of her understanding of her own history was reorganizing itself at a cellular level. Kieran said nothing, He had come to stand where he could see the document from a distance, and he had read enough of it to understand what it was, and he was saying nothing, which was correct. She opened the manila envelope. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting, 2 pages, dated 4 months before his death. She read it. She read it again. She put it face down on the concrete floor and pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes and breathed through her mouth, slow, the way she'd learned in the year after her father died when the grief had been physical, a thing with weight and teeth. Back then she'd thought she understood what she was grieving. She'd thought she knew who she was grieving. Selena. Kieran's voice was quiet. Give me a minute. I gave her the minute. He gave her 2. He stood behind her in the concrete-floored unit under the buzzing lights and waited. She picked the letter back up. Her father had known, when he signed the cooperation agreement, that Marco would eventually figure out who had provided the information. He had known it was a question of when, not if. The letter was partly an explanation and partly an apology and partly a set of instructions, and the instructions were clear. If Marco ever got out early, if anyone ever tried to access the storage unit, she was to take the zip drive to a specific federal prosecutor whose contact information was included, because the zip drive contained the secondary evidence package, the material that hadn't been used in the original trial, the material that was comprehensive enough to put Marco back in prison for the rest of his natural life. Her father had built the whole thing, and then he died before he could tell her, and Marco had spent 11 years in a federal prison knowing, eventually figuring it out, understanding that it was his own brother who had dismantled him. And now he was out. She picked up the zip drive and put it in her jacket pocket. She stood up. The documents he took from the left wall, she said to Kieran. Were those the primary cooperation records? Possibly. His voice was careful. What's on the drive? Secondary evidence package. According to my father, enough to put Marco away permanently. Kieran looked at the drive-shaped outline in her jacket pocket and then back at her face. He was doing the recalibration again, the thing his eyes did when new information was reorganizing his model of a situation. Did you know about any of this? No. Flat. No softening in it. Your father, I know what my father did. She picked up the letter and the cooperation agreement and folded them into her jacket with the drive. He cooperated with the federal government and got his brother convicted, and then he died of a heart attack before he could explain any of it to me. And now I'm standing in a storage unit in Bridgeport holding a zip drive that my uncle would very much like to have. She looked at Kieran. How did Marco know this unit existed? A beat. 1 beat. Kieran. Someone on my end told him, he said. I don't know who yet. I found out an hour ago. There's a leak in my network. Someone passed the unit location and your name as leaseholder to Marco's people approximately 72 hours ago. The cold in the unit was the ordinary concrete and metal cold of a storage facility in November. It was also something else. She stood in it and looked at the man across from her who had told her 5 days ago that she could trust him to communicate directly and immediately, and who had taken 3 days to tell her about the unit, and who was now telling her that the information about the unit had come from inside his own organization. Say the rest of it, she said. The person who leaked it also passed your Milwaukee address, he said, to Marco's people, before I had the surveillance in place. So Marco's people had my address, she said slowly, not because they followed my plates from Chicago. No. They had it from inside your organization. Yes. Before the wedding. Yes. His jaw was tight. I didn't know that when I told you about the plates. I believed what I told you. But when I traced it back, the plate story was a cover. The address had already been passed. She stood there, looked at him. He held the look without flinching, which was either the behavior of a man with nothing to hide or the behavior of a man who'd had years of practice holding eye contact under pressure, and she couldn't tell the difference right now. Is there anything else, she said, that you have not told me? He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Yes. Her whole chest contracted. The federal prosecutor your father named in that letter, he said. I know who she is. She was the lead on the original Vail case before she moved up. Her name is Adler, Caroline Adler. She's now a deputy U.S. attorney. And she called my attorney 8 days ago, he said, looking for you. She didn't say why. My attorney didn't tell me until yesterday. 8 days ago. Before the wedding. Before any of this. Your attorney, she said, didn't know it was relevant. Adler presented it as a routine matter. But you know it's not routine. I know she doesn't make routine calls, he said. which means she already knows about the unit. She may have known for weeks. She may be building something independent of what's on that drive. He paused. Or she may be trying to get to you before Marco does. Selena was very still. Outside the unit, she could hear Reyes moving in the corridor. The fluorescents buzzed. Somewhere at the front of the facility, the manager's phone rang and rang. I need to think, she said. There's not a lot of time to... I need 5 minutes, she said. You've given me approximately 4 separate pieces of information in the last 3 minutes that you had and did not tell me. You can give me 5 minutes. He stepped back without saying anything. She turned to face the empty left wall with its dust shadows of boxes that Marco's people had already emptied, and she stood there and breathed and put it together. Marco had the primary cooperation records. If those were comprehensive enough to expose what her father had done, Marco now had proof of the betrayal. He would use that in one of 2 ways, either as leverage against her or against the political figures those records implicated. The same men who'd been at Maya's wedding, the same men who'd been shaking hands in quiet corners. And he'd had them for 48 hours already. The deputy U.S. attorney was looking for her, which meant the federal case wasn't closed, which meant the drive in her pocket was something someone in the government wanted very much. And Kieran's organization had a leak who had given her address to Marco before the Blackstone wedding, which meant Marco had known she'd be there, which meant her presence at Maya's wedding wasn't coincidence. It had been anticipated. She turned around. The wedding, she said. Maya said Marco came through the back entrance, briefly. Yes. He knew I was going to be there. Selena, he knew I was going to be there, and he knew you would notice me. She was moving through it out loud now, not asking, assembling. If you notice me, you make contact. If you make contact, your people start looking into my background. If your people start looking into my background, they find the storage unit. And if the unit gets accessed, it creates a legal event that could affect the federal hold, Kieran said. His voice was very quiet. He'd already gotten there. He used us both, she said. He used your attention to create a chain of events that would open the unit. And at the same time, he had someone inside your network feeding him information about what you'd find. She breathed. The whole thing was arranged. My being at that wedding. You're seeing me, all of it. The silence in the unit was total. She looked at Kieran Voss, at the man who had looked at her across a ballroom with the patience of someone who had made a decision, and who had sent a photograph to her hotel table, and who had put cars outside her building, and who had sat across from her in a diner and said, I got interested in you as though it were simply a fact about the world, and she understood that the interest had been real. The interest had been genuine, and Marco Vale had seen it happening in real time, possibly through the leak inside Kieran's own network, and had built a structure around it. She had been maneuvered. They had both been maneuvered. The person on your inside, she said. Who is it? I don't know yet. How many people knew about the unit? 3, including my attorney. Then you have a short list. She picked up her bag from the floor where she'd set it. Find them, today. Because if Marco has the primary records and your leak is still active, then whatever you're planning to do about the evidence situation, he already knows about it. She moved toward the door. And one more thing. He looked at her. The night at the Blackstone, she said. The way you looked at me. Was any part of that? No. He said it before she finished the sentence. Immediate, flat, the particular hardness of a man who had just been asked something that genuinely offended him. No, that was mine. That had nothing to do with Marco or anyone else. Whatever he built around it, the beginning of it was real. She looked at him for a long moment. She believed him. She walked out of the unit ahead of him, out into the corridor with its buzzing lights, and as she turned toward the facility entrance, Reyes appeared from the direction of the manager's office, with his phone in his hand and an expression she didn't like. We've got a problem, he said. Kieran looked at him. What? Cameras at the facility entrance caught 2 of Marco's men going through the back lot. They weren't there to watch. They were switching vehicles. He held up the phone. The screen showed a security feed. The sedan that was in the lot when we arrived is gone. There's a new vehicle. A pause. It's a federal plate. The corridor was very quiet. Selena's hand went to her jacket pocket, to the hard shape of the zip drive. The federal government, it turned out, hadn't been waiting for her to come to them. They had been waiting for her to lead them to... They were waiting for her to lead them to the drive. She understood it in the space of one breath. The federal plate, the timing, the fact that Caroline Adler had called Kieran's attorney 8 days ago and presented it as routine. Nothing about this was routine. Adler had known about the unit, had known about the secondary evidence package, had been waiting for someone to physically access it because a warrant to open a federally held storage unit took time and paperwork, and a judge who was willing to move, and it was faster, cleaner, more deniable to simply wait for the leaseholder to do it herself. Back exit, Kieran said. Reyes was already moving. Selena followed without being told to, because the alternative was standing in a corridor while the geometry closed around her, and she had not survived 8 years of careful, deliberate living to get boxed in a storage facility in Bridgeport. She moved fast, not running. Running drew attention, and they were still in a semi-public space, but the kind of purposeful fast walk that ate ground without announcing itself. The back of the facility opened into a service alley, concrete and chain link, a dumpster station at the far end, the river smell cutting through everything. Reyes had a vehicle already positioned there. She didn't ask how. She got in the back seat, and Kieran got in beside her, and the door closed, and the car moved before she'd processed any of it consciously. The drive, Kieran said. It's mine, she said. He looked at her. I know it's yours. I'm asking if you have it. She pressed her hand flat against her jacket pocket. Yes. Then we need to move fast. If Adler's people saw us come in, they may have seen us come out. They won't stop us here. Too visible. Too many questions about jurisdiction and chain of custody. But the moment we're somewhere, they can approach you privately. They approach me. I talk to them, she said. I'm not a criminal. You're holding evidence in a federal matter. His voice was controlled, but the urgency was under it, pressurizing every word. The moment Adler's office gets their hands on that drive, it goes into a process that you cannot control. It gets reviewed, possibly redacted, possibly buried, if the people it implicates have enough reach into the right offices. She turned to look at him fully. Are you telling me not to give federal evidence to federal prosecutors? I'm telling you that your father built that case with the specific intent that you would deliver it to Caroline Adler. I'm telling you that Caroline Adler has since moved up through the U.S. Attorney's Office and has relationships with people whose names are on those records. And I'm telling you that I have had 2 conversations with contacts in Washington in the past 48 hours who have told me that there is significant internal pressure to keep the secondary veil case from ever going to trial. The car was moving north. Selena watched the buildings change outside the window, the industrial pocket of Bridgeport, giving way to the broader streets of Bridgeport proper, corner stores and 2 flats, and a parish school with kids on the playground she could see through the chain link. Normal city, normal day, completely indifferent. Who is on those records, she said. People who were at Maya's wedding, he said, and above them. She sat with that. If I give Adler the drive today, it disappears. It's possible. And if Marco gets the drive? He uses it as leverage for the next 20 years. She looked down at her hands in her lap. They were still steady, which she was beginning to find surreal. She felt like her hands should be shaking, and they weren't, and she didn't know if that was composure or shock or some combination that she'd examine later. There's a third option, she said. I know there is, Kieran said. Make it public. Yes. How? He turned to look at her, and for the first time since the storage unit, she could see something in his face that wasn't controlled. Not quite. Something underneath the management, something hot and purposeful. I have a journalist. Investigative. She's been building a case on the distribution of federal prosecutorial resources in the Midwest for 3 years. If she gets the secondary evidence package, it goes wide before anyone can suppress it. Marco loses his leverage because the information is public. Adler's office can't bury it because it's already been published. And the men whose names are on those records have to answer for it in public. You're journalist, she said. You're journalist. Someone I trust. Kieran, how many people is that exactly? Something moved across his face that was almost rueful. Fewer than I'd like. And in the time it takes to get the drive to a journalist, Marco is still out there, Adler's people are behind us somewhere, and your leak is still active. Yes. So we have approximately... She glanced at Reyes in the front seat. How long before Adler's people work out where we went? Reyes checked his mirror. 40 minutes. Maybe less if they have additional units. 40 minutes, she said. To make a decision that affects a federal investigation, my uncle's future, and apparently the careers of several Chicago politicians. Yes, Kieran said. She breathed. Call your journalist. Han made the call from the back seat while the car moved north toward the Gold Coast. She listened to one side of it, economical, direct. the kind of conversation between people who had rehearsed the possibility without knowing when it would become real. He gave the address of his building. The journalist, he called her Claire, said she'd be there in 30 minutes. They were in Kieran's building in 20. The elevator to the 32nd floor felt different from the first time she'd been in it, 10 days ago, when she'd come up with her jaw set and her bag over her shoulder and no intention of being moved by anything she found. She was moved now. She could feel the day's accumulated weight in her shoulders, in the muscles of her neck, in the specific exhaustion behind her eyes that came not from lack of sleep, but from the kind of sustained, high-stakes alertness that ate through your reserves like a fever. The space looked the same. Books, dark furniture, the lake gray and wide beyond the windows. But there were two additional men present now, standing near the far wall, with the posture of people who had been briefed and were waiting for direction. Reyes moved to them immediately. Low conversation she couldn't hear. Kieran's phone rang before he'd taken his coat off. He looked at the screen and something in his face went very still. "What?" she said. He turned the phone toward her. The caller ID read, M. Vale. The room contracted. She held the look for 1 second and then said, "Answer it." He answered, put it on speaker, and set the phone on the table between them. She stayed where she was, standing, coat still on. "Kieran." Her uncle's voice came through the speaker with the quality of a man who had decided he was done being patient. "I assume my niece is with you." "She is," Kieran said. "Say what you need to say." "I need the drive," Marco said. "I know she found it. I know what's on it. I'm not interested in using it against anyone. I want it because it's my property. It's evidence of what my brother did to my family, and I want it in my hands." Selena moved forward until she was directly over the phone. "It's not your property, Marco." "Selena." His voice shifted, became warmer, which was worse than when it was cold. "Listen to me. Your father was a traitor. He destroyed our family. He put me in a federal prison for 11 years. That drive is the proof of what he did, and I deserve to—" "You deserve to be in the cell," she said. "You've been out for 8 weeks and you've already burned 2 warehouses and compromised a federal evidence chain. You had someone inside Kieran's organization leak my address before I even came to Chicago. Don't talk to me about what you deserve." Silence from the phone. Then, "I see he's told you about that. I figured it out myself. Clever girl." The warmth was gone now. "Your father always said you were the sharp one. He was right." A pause that had something deliberate in it, the pause of a man about to say something he'd been holding. "He told me himself, before he died. He came to see me in prison, 2 years before his heart attack." She was very still. "He sat across from me in that room and he told me what he'd done," Marco said. "He cried. Can you believe that? He told me it was to protect the family. To protect you specifically. He said he'd made a deal that kept your name out of the federal record entirely, yours and your mother's, in exchange for everything else." The lake outside the window was flat and gray and very far below. "And I told him," Marco continued, "that I understood. That family is family. And I meant it, Selena. I still mean it. Give me the drive. Walk away from Kieran Voss and this world that isn't yours. I will not touch you. I will not touch anyone close to you. You have my word." She looked at Kieran. He was looking back at her with his jaw set and his eyes dark and saying nothing, letting her have the space to make the decision, not pushing, not influencing, just there. She looked at the phone. "Your word," she said. "My word. Like the word you gave to the 2 federal witnesses whose testimony your attorney discredited through means that put one of them in the hospital." The silence from the phone was total. "Don't call this number again," she said, and ended the call. The room held the silence for exactly 3 seconds before Kieran's second phone, the one Reyes handled, buzzed on the counter. Reyes picked it up, read it, and turned. "The journalist is downstairs." Claire Rourke was 38, small, with short dark hair, and the specific energy of a person who processed the world primarily as information to be verified. She came into the space with a laptop bag and a recorder, and looked at the drive in Selena's hand with an expression that was not excited but hungry, in the particular professional way of someone who had been building toward something for years. "You've read the cooperation agreement," Claire said. "Yes. And the secondary evidence package? You haven't opened the drive." "Not yet." "I need to open it here," Claire said. "I need to see what we have before I can tell you whether this is publishable in a time frame that gives you protection." Selena handed her the drive. She plugged it into her laptop. The room gathered. Kieran to Selena's right, Reyes near the door, the other two men at the perimeter. Claire opened the files with the methodical speed of someone who knew what they were looking for and had been looking for a long time. Transaction records, Claire said, spanning 14 years. Distribution payments, municipal contracts, permit approvals. She scrolled. Photographs? Surveillance? A pause. Voice recordings. She looked up. Your father recorded conversations. He was thorough, Selena said, and her voice came out flat, and she didn't try to make it anything else. This is significant. Claire looked at her. I need 4 hours to review this properly, to understand the scope before I know what we're dealing with. You have 2, Kieran said. 2 is not. Adler's people are behind us, and Marco Vale has a 48-hour head start on the primary records, Kieran said. 2 hours. Claire looked at him and then at Selena. 2 hours, she said, and opened a new document and started working. The call came at the 40-minute mark. Reyes took it in the corridor. He came back with his face arranged in the careful neutral that Selena had already learned meant bad news being managed. He looked at Kieran, not at her, and that was the tell. What? She said. Reyes looked at her. They picked up Daniel Ashford an hour ago. Federal detention, downtown. Maya's husband. She was moving before the full implication had settled, reaching for her phone, hitting Maya's contact and getting 4 rings in voicemail. She called again. 2 rings this time, cut to voicemail. Maya's not answering. Her phone may be... Reyes began. Don't manage it, she said. What happened? Ashford was picked up on a material witness warrant related to the Vale federal matter, Adler's office. Reyes kept his voice level. They're using him as leverage. The warrant requires him to provide testimony related to Vale family financial instruments, including the storage unit leaseholder's current whereabouts. She turned to Kieran. They're using Daniel to find me. Yes. And if Daniel tells them where I am, they come here with a warrant for the drive, Kieran said, and for you as a material witness. I haven't done anything. You accessed a federally held storage unit and removed evidence. His voice was very careful. That's arguable either way, but Adler's office can make it stick long enough to take the drive and move you into protective custody, where Marco cannot reach you, but neither can anyone else. Claire looked up from her laptop. I need more time. You have 90 minutes, Kieran said. That's not what I... 90 minutes and then we move. He looked at Selena. Maya is probably fine. Adler wouldn't touch her. She has no direct connection to the evidence chain. She's connected to Daniel. Daniel's a witness. They don't want him charged. They want him talking. Selena's phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from a number she didn't have saved. A Chicago area code. The message was a photograph. It took her 2 seconds to process what she was looking at. A figure she recognized as Maya, in a parking structure, getting into a car with a man whose face was turned away from the camera. The car had a license plate she couldn't read at this resolution. The timestamp on the photograph was 43 minutes ago. Below the photograph, a message. She went willingly. But willingness has conditions. Her uncle. Her uncle had Maya. The room had gone very quiet. She was aware that Kieran had come to look at the phone over her shoulder, and she was aware of his stillness as he read it. The specific quality of stillness that she'd come to understand was his version of rage, contained, directed inward and outward simultaneously. He doesn't want the drive anymore, she said. No, Kieran said. He wants me. Yes, she looked at the photograph. Maya in a parking structure 43 minutes ago, getting into a car, willingly, which meant he'd approached her first and offered something that made her move without apparent coercion. Her uncle was systematic. He'd pulled Daniel into a federal process to keep Kieran's hands tied, and he'd picked up Maya not as a hostage but as bait. The one person guaranteed to move Selena out of a secured location and into reach. Where is he? She said. Selena, where would he take her? She turned to face him. You know this city. You know where his people operate. If he's had 48 hours to reestablish, where does he go? Kieran held her look. The Bridgeport crew has 3 properties near the river. The one he'd use for a meeting, somewhere controlled, somewhere he can leave quickly. There's a warehouse on West 37th that his people have been watching. One of my contacts flagged movement there 2 days ago. Take me there. No. Flat. Immediate. She's my family. Walking into Marco Vale's controlled space with the drive he wants is not a rescue plan, he said. It's a delivery. Then I go without the drive. She turned to Claire. You have 90 minutes. Copy everything. Publish whatever you can. The drive stays with you. She looked back at Kieran. And you take me to West 37th, Selena. He said her name the way he'd said it the first time across the ballroom, except this time it was low, and it had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not control, something rawer than control. If something happens to you in that building, then you have a journalist with a fully loaded evidence package and a federal case that blows open without me, she said, which is what my father wanted, which is what the drive is for. She held his look. My cousin is in a car with my uncle because I didn't walk away fast enough 8 years ago. I'm not sitting in this room while that's happening. The room was still. Claire was watching them both. Reyes had his hand near his radio. Kieran looked at her for a long moment. Looked at her the way he'd looked at her from across the Blackstone ballroom, that specific quality of attention that had started all of this. Except now it had been stripped of everything performative, and what was left underneath was just a man who had made a calculation and arrived somewhere he hadn't planned to be. Stay behind me, he said. In the building, you stay behind me. You do not engage with Marco directly until I've controlled the space. And if I tell you to move, you move. Agreed. I mean it. So do I. He looked at her for one more second. Then he turned to Reyes and said 2 words that sent the room into motion. They were in the elevator 30 seconds later, dropping fast toward the garage, and Selena pressed her back against the mirrored wall and breathed through her mouth and felt the weight of the zip drive's absence in her pocket, like the specific lightness of having put down something you'd been carrying too long, and understood that everything she'd been careful about for 8 years, the distance, the anonymity, the ordinary life she'd built in a city that wasn't Chicago, had already ended, back in a storage unit in Bridgeport, the moment she'd opened a box with her name on it in her dead father's handwriting. There was no careful anymore. The elevator hit the garage level, the doors opened, and Kieran Voss stepped out first, into the concrete dark, with Selena Vovale 1 step behind him, into the concrete dark, and the garage door was already opening ahead of them, gray November light cutting in from the street like something impatient. The drive to West 37th took 11 minutes. Selena counted them. Not deliberately. Her brain was doing the thing it did under pressure, subdividing time into manageable units, breaking the uncontrollable into pieces small enough to hold. 11 minutes in the back of Rhea's car with Kieran beside her, and 2 additional vehicles behind them carrying people she didn't know, but had decided to trust by proximity and necessity. The city moved past the windows. A school, a laundromat, a taqueria with its lights on, and somebody's grandmother visible through the glass, eating alone at a table by the window, completely unaware that 11 minutes away something was about to happen that had been building for 11 years. The warehouse on West 37th backed up against a rail line that hadn't moved freight in 6 years, long enough that the weeds growing through the ties had gotten thick and established. The building itself was brick, 2 stories, the windows on the upper level mostly intact, the loading dock on the south side sealed with a rolling steel door that had been painted over so many times the surface was thick and ridged. From the street it looked abandoned. 3 things told her it wasn't: the fresh tire tracks in the dirt apron along the south face, a line of yellow light visible at the seam of one upper window, and the man standing at the corner of the building who was trying to look like he wasn't standing there and wasn't succeeding. Reyes parked a block back. The other vehicles went around to the north side. Kieran looked at her once, the kind of look that said everything he wasn't going to say out loud, and then he opened the door and moved. She moved with him. They went in through the east side, a personnel door at ground level, whose lock Reyes handled in under 30 seconds. Inside it was cold and smelled like old oil and standing water, the floor concrete scarred with the ghost marks of equipment that had been moved out years ago. A stairwell at the far end. Yellow light from above. Kieran moved without making sound in a way she noted professionally. He'd done this before, in spaces like this. The particular economy of a man who knew how buildings worked when they were being used for the kind of business that happened in the dark. She stayed close, 1 step behind his right shoulder as she'd agreed, her breathing controlled through her nose. At the top of the stairs, voices. Marco's first. She'll come. Stop checking the door. A second voice she didn't know. Then Maya's, and the specific quality of Maya's voice telling her things, Her eyes couldn't yet confirm, because Maya sounded steady, not terrified, which meant she was scared but functional, which meant she hadn't been hurt. Selena let out a breath she'd been holding since the parking structure photograph. Kieran held up a fist, and they stopped. He turned to her, put two fingers to his eyes, and then pointed at the door. He was going to look first. She nodded. He moved to the door, which was ajar, and looked through the gap for 10 seconds with the patience of a man reading a room he needed to understand completely before he entered it. Then he turned back, held up 4 fingers, 4 people inside. He moved his hand to indicate positions, 2 at the far end, 1 near the window, Marco somewhere central. He looked at her. She understood. He pushed the door open and went through. The room had been some kind of foreman's office before it became this. A table, folding chairs, portable work lights running off a generator that hummed in the corner. Maya was sitting in a chair near the table, not restrained, which confirmed what Selena had already assessed. Marco had not taken her by force. He'd offered her something. A story, probably. A version of events that made coming with him sound like the reasonable choice. That was his method, always. He made force unnecessary until it wasn't. Marco Vale was 61 years old, and prison had not diminished him the way she'd allowed herself to imagine. He was heavier than she remembered, and grayer, and there were new lines in his face, but his eyes were the same. The specific dark attentiveness of a man who processed the world as a series of problems to be managed. He looked at Kieran when he came through the door, and his expression shifted. Not surprised, recalculating, the math of a man adjusting his model. And then he looked past Kieran and found Selena, and something happened in his face that was more complicated than she had expected. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who had missed her. She didn't let that move her. "Selena," he said. "Marco. Where's the drive?" "Safe." His jaw shifted. One of the 2 men at the far end moved slightly, and Kieran looked at them once, just once, with an expression she couldn't see from behind him, but which she could infer from the fact that both men went very still. "Maya," Selena said, without looking away from Marco. "Are you hurt?" "No." Maya's voice was controlled. "He told me you were in danger. He told me you'd been taken." A pause. "I know that was a lie now." "I'm sorry," Selena said. "I should have explained everything sooner." "Yes," Maya said, "you absolutely should have." Marco looked between them with the expression of a man whose staging had been seen through and who was deciding whether to continue or pivot. He pivoted. "I don't want the drive anymore," he said. "Your journalist has it." "Yes." "Then it's already over." He said it simply, not angrily, a man stating a fact. If Rourke has the package and she's been working her case for 3 years, the story goes out in what? 48 hours, maybe less. He moved to the folding chair closest to him and sat down, which was not what she'd expected, and the unexpectedness of it made the room shift slightly. "I know what's on the drive. I've known what your father built in that unit for 6 years. I had an investigator find the unit 4 years ago and catalog the contents without touching them." Kieran's voice came out carefully. "Then why?" "Because I needed the federal hold lifted," Marco said, "and the only way to lift it was for the leaseholder to access it, which would create a legal event, which would trigger Adler's office to move." He looked at Selena. "I needed Adler to move." She looked at him. "You wanted the story to come out, not the way you think." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a moment he looked exactly like the uncle who had sat in her father's kitchen when she was 12 and taught her how to play cards. And she pressed that memory flat immediately because sentiment was a door, and she could not afford open doors right now. "There are names on that drive. Political names. People who have been using the federal prosecution infrastructure in this region as a personal instrument for 15 years. Directing cases, suppressing cases, applying pressure. Your father documented all of it, not because he was noble, because he was building insurance." "Insurance he never used," she said. "Insurance that died with him before he could use it." Marco held her gaze. "Adler is on that drive. Not as a prosecutor. As a recipient. Your father documented payments to her office going back 12 years. She has been protecting certain interests in this city since before she had the title to do it officially. The reason the secondary case never went to trial, the reason the drive stayed sealed, is because Adler sealed it." The generator hummed in the corner. Rain had started outside. She could hear it on the roof, steady and impersonal. Adler sealed evidence that implicated herself, Selina said. Yes. And you needed it unsealed so it would go public before she could suppress it again. I needed someone to take it out of that unit and put it in front of a journalist who had been building the surrounding case independently, Marco said. Someone Adler couldn't move against without exposing herself. Someone whose access to the unit was legally unimpeachable. He paused. Someone whose name your father had specifically kept out of every federal record in exchange for his cooperation. She understood then, all of it, the whole architecture of it, laid out in the foreman's office of an abandoned warehouse in a November rain. Her father hadn't just protected her, he'd positioned her. He'd built a structure around his daughter that would, 11 years after his death, make her the one person who could walk into a federally held storage unit, legally remove evidence, and deliver it to a journalist without being touched. Because her name wasn't in the case, because she had no exposure, because he had traded everything else to keep her clean. And Marco had known it for 6 years, and had waited, because the moment required Kieran Voss's attention and her presence at a wedding and a chain of events he couldn't entirely manufacture. He could only create conditions and wait. The man inside Kieran's organization, she said. The leak. My employee for 3 years, Marco said. A man Kieran inherited from previous management without fully auditing. He looked at Kieran directly. Not a plant. Just a man who owed me money and made a choice. He told me about the unit, and he told me about you noticing Selina at the Blackstone. That second piece I didn't need. It happened on its own. You did that yourself. Kieran said nothing. His hands were at his sides, very still. I didn't arrange your interest in my niece, Marco said. I used it. There's a difference. You should understand that distinction. It's the kind of distinction you make yourself, regularly. Something moved across Kieran's face. He absorbed it, the way she'd watched him absorb things, fully, without performance, without pretending it hadn't landed. Maya spoke from her chair. Can we go home now? The room held the question for a moment. Then the absurdity of it, the ordinary human weight of it in a room full of people who had been maneuvering each other across a city for 2 weeks, pressed through the tension like air through a crack, and Selina exhaled. Maya, she said. Yes, we can go, She looked at Marco one last time. The name's on that drive, she said, including yours. Including mine, he agreed. I'm not in a position to ask for anything from you, Selina. I know that. What your father did was his decision. What I did after, how I used you to undo the damage, that's mine to own. He looked at her with those dark, familiar eyes. I will go back to prison. The federal hold on my release conditions, once the story breaks, will be reinstated by a judge who isn't in Adler's pocket. I know that. I accepted it. Then why? Because those names needed to come out, he said. Your father understood that before he died. So do I. He held her look. He wasn't a good man. I wasn't a good man. But he built something in that storage unit that was bigger than either of us, and I needed it to see the light. She stood in the middle of the room that smelled like oil and rain and let the silence exist for a moment before she said what she had to say. The man he was, the things he did to protect me. I don't know if I forgive him or if forgiveness is even the right category for it. She paused. But I understand it. Marco nodded, once, slowly. He would be glad to hear that. She turned and walked to the door and didn't look back. Outside, the rain had settled into the steady, purposeful kind that wasn't going to stop soon, and the wet street reflected the work lights from Kieran's vehicles in long orange streaks. Maya was out before Selina, already on the phone. Daniel, Selina assumed, who had presumably been released from federal detention once Adler's office had lost the leverage point of Maya's location. She watched her cousin walk 20 feet down the sidewalk with one hand over her ear and her shoulders hunching against the rain and registered, with a full-body kind of relief, that Maya was intact, functional. Furious, probably, and that was correct, and there would be a conversation that Selina owed her that was going to be long and difficult and necessary. Not tonight. Kieran came out behind her. They stood together under the narrow overhang of the warehouse entrance while the rain came down in front of them, 2 feet of shelter while the street was thoroughly wet. She was aware of the warmth of him beside her, the physical reality of it. She'd been aware of it for 2 weeks in the distanced, catalogued way of someone maintaining appropriate assessment of a threat, and now the threat categorization was changing into something she didn't have clean language for. Your leak, she said. Already handled. His voice was flat. While we were inside. She didn't ask what handled. Some questions she'd decided not to ask. Adler's office, she said. Once the story breaks, she'll be removed from the active federal matter immediately. The secondary evidence package combined with Rourke's 3 years of surrounding reporting, her position becomes indefensible within 48 hours. He paused. The people on those records above her will take longer. Some of them will negotiate. Some will fight it. It will be a year of news cycles before it's through. But it comes out. It comes out, he said. Your father's documentation is watertight. He was thorough, like you said. She stood with that. The rain tapped against the loading dock and ran in rivulets down the brick face of the warehouse wall. He positioned me for this, she said. From the time I was a child, probably. He was building toward this for years, and he kept me clean so that I could be the person who walked through a door he couldn't walk through himself. Yes. I don't know how to feel about that. You don't have to know yet. She looked at him sideways. He was looking out at the street, at the rain, his profile wet along the jaw, where the overhang didn't quite reach. There was a cut at his hairline she hadn't noticed before. From the building entry, probably. Something she'd missed in the movement. It had stopped bleeding but hadn't been cleaned. Without thinking about it, she put 2 fingers to it, just checking, and he went very still. She pulled her hand back. Sorry, she said. Don't be. His voice was low. She looked at her own fingers, where the blood had transferred in a thin, dark line. She pressed them together and looked out at the rain. I owe you an apology, he said. She turned her head. For the storage unit information, for the 3 days. He wasn't looking at her, still watching the street, his jaw set. I told you I'd communicate directly, and I didn't. I was managing the information to protect you from it, and I had no right to do that. No, she said. You didn't. I know. You can't do that, she said. Whatever this is, whatever comes next. You cannot decide what I'm ready to know about my own life. I'm not a person who needs that. I know what you are, he said, and finally looked at her. Up close in the dim light, his face was wet and tired and more open than she'd ever seen it. The management stripped away by 11 days of compressed intensity, down to something that was just him, just the man underneath the weight of everything he'd built and carried. I knew what you were the first time I saw you. I was standing against a wall. You were standing against a wall like you'd made peace with standing alone, and you weren't going to apologize for it. His voice was quiet, but there was nothing apologetic in it. I'd never seen anything like that in a room full of people who perform every second they're in public. She turned to face him more directly. The rain was still coming down. Maya had gotten off her phone and was walking back, not hurrying, giving them the space of someone who had decided to give them the space. I'm not easy, Selena said. No. I'm not going to become a different kind of person because I'm in your world. I need it said plainly. I don't want a different kind of person. He held her look without flinching. I want the specific difficult version that I've been arguing with for 2 weeks. She almost smiled. It surprised her, the almost smile, the way it arrived without permission. That's a low bar for a romantic statement. It's an honest one, she breathed. Your world is still dangerous. Yes. My uncle is going back to prison. The people on those records are going to look for someone to blame when the story breaks. Some of them will look in our direction. Yes. And you think that's manageable? I think, he said carefully, that it is more manageable with you knowing everything, making your own decisions, and not being handled. He paused. I learned that. Maya reached them. She looked at Kieran with the specific expression of a woman who had been evaluating him for 2 weeks through every means available to her, and had arrived at a verdict she wasn't entirely comfortable with. Then she looked at Selena. I need a cup of tea and a very long conversation with you. Yes, Selena said. You do? Not tonight. No, not tonight. Maya looked at Kieran again, this time with something that wasn't warmth exactly, but was in the neighborhood of provisional acceptance. The look of someone who had decided that all evidence considered, a person was not the enemy, without yet being ready to say so out loud. She nodded at him once, precisely, and walked to the waiting vehicle. Kieran looked at Selena. Claire will have the story ready by morning, he said. Once it's published, your exposure as the access point for the unit becomes moot. You'll be a named source in a federal case, but not a target. He paused. You can go back to Milwaukee. She looked at the rain on the street. She thought about her apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant, the sound of the walk through the floor, the life drawing class on Tuesdays, The 4 careful years of deliberate nobody in particular. She thought about opening her laptop on Monday morning and working on a brand identity project for a mid-sized company that would never know she existed beyond her deliverables, and she sat with that image for a long moment, gave it the respect of genuine consideration. "I can," she said. He said nothing. Waiting. The way he had always waited, without pressure, with the patience of a man who'd decided something and was willing to let other people arrive at their own conclusions. "But I spent 8 years leaving," she said. "I don't know if that's who I still am." I was looking at her with those dark, attentive eyes that had started all of this. The gaze across a ballroom that had moved through her life like a stone through water, sending out rings she hadn't finished feeling yet. He didn't push. He didn't offer. He just held the look and let her be in the space of her own decision. She picked up her bag from the ground where she'd set it when she'd touched his hairline. She held the strap in both hands and turned it once and looked at it, and then looked up. "Your building," she said. "The 32nd floor. Claire is still up there." "Yes." "I want to be there when she finishes reviewing the package." She paused. "I want to see it. The full scope of what my father built. I want to understand it before it becomes public." "Okay," he said. "And then," she said, "I want to have a conversation. Not about logistics, not about Marco or Adler or the case. A conversation about what this is." She indicated the space between them with a slight movement of her hand that covered it without defining it. "Whatever this is." The corner of his mouth moved. She'd seen it before. At the bar at the Blackstone, the not-quite smile that lived just at the edge of his default expression, that she'd spent 2 weeks pretending wasn't compelling. She let herself register it this time without pressing it down. "Okay," he said again. They walked to the vehicle together through the rain, that didn't care about any of it. That was just November rain over Chicago doing what November rain did, soaking into brick and concrete, running along gutters, turning the city's lights into something diffuse and widespread, spreading them out until the whole dark sky seemed to glow from below. The story ran at 6:43 the following morning. Claire Rourke's byline. The headline took up the full top of the screen. The secondary evidence package, her 3 years of surrounding reporting, and the cooperation agreement signed by Thomas Vale 11 years ago, laid out with the methodical precision of someone who had been waiting to write this for a long time and was not going to rush it when the moment finally came. Selina sat at the window of the 32nd floor with coffee that was actually warm this time, the lake flat and gunmetal in the early light, and read every word. By 8 a.m., Caroline Adler had been placed on administrative leave. By 9, 2 aldermen had issued statements that helped no one. By 11, a federal judge in the Northern District had reinstated the conditions of Marco Vale's compassionate release and issued a supplemental warrant for his return to custody. He surrendered himself to a federal marshal at a downtown office at 2 in the afternoon, without drama, with the particular composure of a man who had anticipated this and made whatever private accommodations he needed to make. Selina watched the news brief on her phone and sat with it for a while. Her uncle had been a dangerous man who had done dangerous things, and he had also been the man who had, by a long and circuitous and morally unclean route, made sure her father's work survived long enough to matter. She didn't know what to do with that. She suspected she wasn't going to know for a long time, and she made the decision to let it be unresolved rather than forcing it into a shape that fit cleanly. Not everything resolved cleanly. That was something she was learning to accept. Kieran came and sat beside her at the window at noon. He put a plate of food on the table between them. She hadn't eaten since the night before, and the fact that he'd noticed and acted on it without announcing it was something she filed away without comment. They sat together and looked at the lake. "Daniel got home this morning," she said. Maya texted. "Good. She says she wants to have dinner, the 4 of us." A pause. "I told her we'd talk about it." He looked at her sideways. "4 of us." "Don't make a thing of it." He turned back to the lake. She could see him not making a thing of it, the controlled effort of it, which was its own kind of thing. She picked up her coffee. "My client's in Milwaukee," she said. "The brand identity project is due Thursday. I can work from here until Thursday." "You can work from here past Thursday," he said carefully. "I know I can." She turned her head to look at him. "I'm telling you Thursday because Thursday is what I have right now. I don't have further than that." He nodded. "Thursday," he said. "That's fine." And it was fine, and it was also the beginning of something, not the beginning of trust exactly, because trust had been built and broken and rebuilt in the compressed weeks of a November that had rearranged her understanding of her own history, but the beginning of the decision to see what came next, to stop running in the specific direction of a way, and start moving in the direction of something she couldn't name yet but could feel the shape of, the way you could feel the shape of a city at night from the window of a high floor, the lights spreading out to the horizon, nothing clear, everything present. Outside, Chicago moved through its day. The lake held its color against the gray sky. The city, that had taught itself to fear silence, was loud with the ordinary sounds of ordinary people doing ordinary things, all of it running underneath the story that was remaking the architecture of its political life, the way rivers remade land, slow at first, then suddenly, then permanent. Selena set down her coffee and picked up her laptop and opened the brand identity project and started working. Kieran sat beside her and read something on his phone, and after a while went to make calls, moving to the other side of the room, keeping his voice low. And she worked, and he worked, and the morning turned into afternoon, and the lake stayed gray, and the coffee stayed warm, and the careful, ordinary life she'd built in Milwaukee felt not like something she'd lost, but like something she'd grown out of. The way you grew out of a coat that had once been exactly right. Not because it was a bad coat, but because you had changed shape in ways that the coat couldn't account for. She had changed shape. She couldn't yet say into what, but she was here, in this city, with this man who had looked at her across a room and paid attention, and made 100 imperfect decisions, and was sitting 30 feet away on the phone, and she had the drive's contents published, and her uncle back in custody, and her cousin home with her husband, and a brand identity project due Thursday. And the window in front of her was full of November light, which was a thin and imperfect light, the light of a season that wasn't pretending to be anything other than cold and honest and real. She worked. He worked. The city continued below them, enormous and indifferent and alive. And Selena Vale, who had spent 8 years learning to stand alone and had gotten very good at it, let the silence between herself and another person be something other than a distance to be maintained. She let it be the particular silence of two people in the same room, moving through the same complicated day, choosing, not performing, not pretending, not managing, just choosing to be in the same space. That was the whole of it. That, it turned out, was enough.